He never expected a simple complaint to turn into a fight for his dignity. One moment, he was settling into his new neighborhood, hoping for peace. The next, he found himself accused, judged, and branded as a threat, before anyone even bothered to learn his name. It started with a car, a misunderstanding, they called it, but the hostility in their eyes said otherwise. This wasn't about a vehicle at all. It was about who they thought he was. And when they called the police on him, they had no idea who they were really dealing with. But the real story began long before that knock on the door. What happened next would unravel everything they thought they controlled. For the first few weeks in Riverside Heights, life felt like a fresh start. After years of long nights and heavier memories, moving into his own home seemed like a quiet victory for Morrison. He kept to himself, spent his mornings sanding down the edges of the Mustang's interior trim, and his evenings running the same 3-block loop to clear his mind. It wasn't luxury, but it was finally peace, something he hadn't tasted in far too long. Most neighbors waved politely. Some even admired the car as they passed. Morrison appreciated that small reminders that community could still exist without judgment. He didn't advertise who he was or what title he carried. He wanted, just once, to be seen as a person before a position. But peace in Riverside Heights came with conditions, and it didn't take long before he noticed the sideways glances, the hushed conversations that abruptly stopped when he approached, the way Patricia Dalton, the self-appointed ruler of the HOA, seemed to study him every time he drove by. Her son, Tyler, stared at the Mustang like it was already his, an entitled hunger in his eyes that made Morrison uneasy. Still, he brushed it off. New neighborhoods took time to adjust. People were curious, cautious, sometimes nosy. He tried to believe that was all it was. But the first radar warning came quietly, just a small, dismissive comment, tossed his way like it meant nothing. A reminder that in some places, no matter how qualified, accomplished, or decent you are, some people only see what they want to see. And Morrison didn't yet realize that their curiosity was about to twist into something much darker, something that would turn his quiet neighborhood into a battlefield he never asked for. But the moment that pushed everything over the edge was still waiting for him, just days away. The tension didn't come all at once. It built in small, unsettling moments, little shifts that Morrison first brushed off but couldn't ignore forever. It began with Tyler drifting onto his driveway more often, pretending to admire the Mustang, while studying Morrison with the same entitlement he wore like a second skin. The boys circled the car repeatedly, memorizing every line of its restored body, treating it as though it were already promised to him. Morrison kept his responses brief, careful, unwilling to escalate something that wasn't yet a problem. But each encounter left a faint unease blooming in the back of his mind. Then the warnings started. Thin envelopes tucked neatly against his front door, each sealed with the neat, controlling handwriting of Patricia Dalton. The first one questioned the appropriateness of storing a vintage vehicle in a residential garage. The next claimed the paint color was disruptive to neighborhood harmony. Another insisted the car might violate a noise regulation, despite the fact that Morrison hadn't even started the engine that week. Individually, the notices were laughable. Together, they were unmistakable. This wasn't about the car. It was about him, who he was, what he looked like, and what they believed about men who looked like him. He reported each violation by calmly addressing the inaccuracies, citing exact bylaws, and returning the letters to the HOA office box. He hoped the professionalism would send a message, but professionalism meant nothing to someone who'd already decided he didn't belong. One afternoon, as he polished the Mustang's chrome, he felt eyes burning into his back. Turning, he saw Patricia pacing along the sidewalk, watching him openly. There was no attempt to hide her scrutiny. She looked at him the way someone studies a problem they intend to remove, slow, calculating, already convinced of their righteousness. When their eyes met, she didn't smile. She simply turned away, whispering something to a neighbor who immediately glanced in his direction. It was a kind of silent conversation Morrison had seen 100 times throughout his career, where opinions were shaped without facts, where fear was passed around like currency. He tried to let it go. He told himself he'd dealt with worse. But the shift in the neighborhood became impossible to ignore. Conversations quieted whenever he walked by. Parents ushered their children inside when he strolled down the sidewalk. Neighbors who once waved at him now looked away, pretending not to see him. And every evening, Patricia's curtains seemed to twitch as he returned home, as though she was cataloging every movement he made. Still, he held his patience. He reminded himself that his position carried responsibility. Even outside uniform, he would not escalate. He would not give them a reason to twist the narrative. But Tyler was not so subtle. One morning, Morrison found footprints around the Mustang, fresh, heavy, circling it as though someone had walked around it repeatedly during the night. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, but the footprint alone were enough to make his stomach tighten. It felt like a threat wrapped in curiosity, like someone testing boundaries, like someone waiting for permission to step further. And then came the breaking point. Late one evening, Morrison heard a faint scraping outside his garage, a metallic whisper that set every instinct in his body on alert. When he stepped outside, he saw Tyler standing near the Mustang, hand hovering dangerously close to the driver's door. The boy wasn't admiring it anymore. He was trying to open it. Morrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't step closer. He simply made his presence known. The boy jolted, startled, then backed away with a glare that carried more entitlement than fear. He muttered something under his breath before storming off, disappearing into the darkness with the swagger of someone who believed he could do no wrong. 20 minutes later, Patricia arrived, her posture stiff, her expression furious, radiating the righteous anger of someone convinced she'd been wronged. She accused him of mistreating her son, claimed he had been aggressive, insisted that she felt unsafe living near him. Her words were chosen carefully, each one dipped in that same coded language Morrison had heard countless times in reports, cases, and late-night emergency calls. Language designed to paint him as a threat. By morning, 3 more violation notices appeared at his door. And then, the final insult. Patricia marching up to his home with the firm conviction that she could demand entry to his garage. Her voice carried across the street, filled with accusations, claims that he was hiding stolen property, that she had the right to see what was inside, that the police were already on their way. She treated him like a criminal, without knowing a single truth about him. She had no idea she had just summoned the very department he commanded. But the moment she realized who he was, the moment her certainty shattered, was still seconds away, and it would change everything. Patricia's fist slammed against the garage door again, the echo rolling through the quiet street like thunder. Her voice was sharp, shrill, trembling with the kind of confidence built on years of getting her way. Tyler hovered behind her, arms crossed, smirking like he was watching entertainment instead of escalating a situation he'd caused. Morrison stepped toward the front door with a calm he didn't entirely feel, not because he feared them, but because he knew exactly how quickly scenes like this could spiral, how fast assumptions turn into danger. And when Patricia shouted that the police were on their way, something inside him tightened. He'd seen how calls like this were coded, how they were interpreted, how easily a suspicious man could turn into a threat in the wrong officer's mind. He opened the front door slowly, letting the sunlight spill onto the porch. Patricia froze mid-rant. Her eyes flicked from his face to the badge clipped at his waist. The color drained from her cheeks, so quickly it looked like someone had flipped a switch. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. But the moment of realization didn't end the conflict. It ignited a far uglier one. The squad car arrived with a screech seconds later, lights washing the street in red and blue. Officer Brent stepped out, new to the force, eager for approval, and clearly reacting to the frantic dispatch report he'd received. His hand hovered near his holster as he scanned the scene, eyes locking onto Morrison with the kind of suspicion Morrison knew all too well. Not because of who he was, but because of what he looked like. Patricia didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, pretending to be shaken, constructing a story with trembling hands and tear-thin lies. He threatened us. He has something in the garage. I think he stole. She didn't finish. Brent's hand moved to his weapon, knuckles whitening. And in that split second, Morrison felt a familiar chill, the same one he'd felt countless times standing over victims who never got a chance to explain. He knew exactly how this could go wrong, how a single misunderstanding could end everything, How many names he'd written in reports. How many families he delivered impossible news to. He slowly raised his hands. Not because he was guilty, but because he knew the world wasn't built to give him the benefit of the doubt. "Sir," stepped forward. Brent barked, voice sharp with adrenaline. Morrison complied, slow steps, even breathing, every movement deliberate. He could feel the neighbors watching from porches, from behind blinds, phones discreetly recording while still hoping for spectacle. He could feel Tyler's self-satisfied smirk, Patricia's quivering indignation, the tension thick enough to choke on. Brent reached for his cuffs. And that's when Morrison spoke, calm, controlled, carrying the weight of authority that stopped the air cold around them. "Officer, look at my badge." Brent hesitated. Confusion flickered. His eyes dropped and widened. The emblem gleamed in the sunlight, unmistakable. Riverside Heights Police Department. Chief of Police. The transformation was immediate. Brent's posture collapsed into shock. Patricia stumbled backward, her lie crumbling in her throat. Tyler's smirk vanished, replaced with something closer to fear. But Morrison didn't raise his voice. He didn't let the anger burning in his chest guide him. He simply held Brent's gaze, letting the silence press down like a weight. Because this moment wasn't just about a car, or a lie, or an HOA president gone drunk with power. It was about something deeper, something older than this neighborhood, older than any one person here. The assumption that a black man with something worth protecting must have stolen it. That authority couldn't belong to someone who looked like him. That fear could be weaponized with a single phone call. Brent finally swallowed. "Chief, I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Morrison said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and true. The entire street seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would come next, what justice would look like when the person they'd accused was the one in charge. But the fallout, the consequences, the reckoning that was coming for Patricia and Tyler, that was only just beginning. Brent stood frozen, the weight of the moment sinking in faster than the flashing lights could fade. Patricia's shaky facade crumbled completely when she realized there was no narrative she could spin now. Not with the chief of police standing in front of her, not with half the neighborhood watching. Tyler shifted behind her, his bravado draining into the pavement. Morrison didn't yell. He didn't demand apologies. He simply stepped back, letting the silence expose everything they had tried to hide behind rules, lies, and fear. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of the rage he felt, only a quiet exhaustion shaped by experience. "Officer Brent," he said, turning toward the young man who still looked as though the ground might open beneath him, "you're going to write this report exactly as it happened, every word." Brent nodded quickly, his face pale. Morrison could see the realization settling in, the understanding that he had come within seconds of making a mistake that would haunt him forever. Maybe the mistake of ending a life. Maybe the mistake of ending his own career. Maybe both. Patricia tried to interrupt, stammering excuses, insisting this was a misunderstanding, a simple mix-up. But Morrison held up a hand. She quieted instantly, not because he was intimidating, but because, for the first time, she saw him as someone she couldn't control. He explained calmly that filing a false police report was a crime. That harassment was a violation of HOA bylaws. That discrimination, even when wrapped in polite suburban language, had consequences. She blanched at every word. There was no wiggle room now, no selective interpretation she could manipulate. By the next afternoon, the HOA board, terrified of further fallout, had voted to remove Patricia from her position. Her power dissolved overnight. For the first time since he moved in, Morrison walked down the street without feeling eyes digging into his back. Some neighbors offered apologies. Others avoided him entirely. A few admitted they should have spoken up sooner. But even with the resolution, the damage lingered. That night, sitting in his garage with the Mustang's hood open, Morrison found himself replaying the moment Brent's hand had drifted toward his weapon. He kept thinking about how easily that scene could have ended differently, how a misunderstanding fueled by bias could have erased everything he'd built, and how, for so many people who looked like him, it had ended differently. He thought about the years he'd spent working cases involving men and women who never got the chance to clear their name, who never got the chance to show a badge, who never got the chance to explain, people who didn't hold authority, people who didn't get believed, people who didn't survive the benefit of hindsight. The Mustang sat quietly beside him, its grabber blue paint reflecting the low light. He traced his hand along the fender, thinking of his father, of the long hours they spent rebuilding it piece by piece. His father used to say, "Some things are worth protecting, even when people don't understand why." Now, looking at his reflection wavering on the paint, he knew his father wasn't talking about cars. He was talking about dignity, identity, humanity. In the days that followed, Morrison made sure Brent underwent additional training. Real training. Not the kind that checked boxes, but the kind that confronted uncomfortable truths. He wasn't out to ruin the young officer's life. He was out to prevent a future tragedy. Patricia, meanwhile, retreated from community affairs entirely. Tyler avoided eye contact whenever Morrison drove by. But even with the neighborhood quiet again, something had changed in Morrison. Not fear, not bitterness, but a renewed clarity. This wasn't an isolated confrontation. It was a symptom of something deeper, something persistent, something people like to pretend didn't exist behind manicured lawns and HOA meetings. Bias didn't always shout. It whispered. It hid behind rules. It smiled while tightening its grip. And if this could happen to the chief of police in his own driveway, what happened to the people without badges, without titles, without the power to prove their innocence on the spot? What happened to the people who never got to walk back inside afterward? As he closed the garage door that night, Morrison couldn't help wondering, how many more stories like this would unfold before people finally admitted the truth? How many more close calls? How many more lives? And when will we stop treating justice as a privilege instead of a right?